It's a wrap for OTAs. Mandatory minicamp coming up soon. There's a State of the Union as well, but our takeaways, and I think we know what this defensive backfield is going to start to look like for the 49ers, and some notes on Kyle Shanahan's offense, where it ranks in the NFL in certain very pertinent spots. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On 49ers podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We love all of our everydayers. We appreciate it when you subscribe on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is sponsored by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 extra to play with. And all you got to do is win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right. Some very interesting statistics out there that I've seen recently that I think tell a story about Kyle Shanahan and Kyle Shanahan's offense and why he builds things the way he builds them. I want to talk about some players that were on the field first, Croc, though, at OTAs. And particularly, we had talked about second-year breakout players, right? Second-year players that could potentially be breakouts on our last podcast. And one of the guys we singled out was Darrell Luter, last year's fifth-round cornerback. Could he be the guy who's the number 3 corner, jumps in on the outside, and is maybe somebody that is at least the top backup on the outside? Or Renardo Green, is he going to be the full-time nickel for the 49ers? Diamondo Lenore stays on the outside. Was listening, though, on Friday to KNBR Radio, local in San Francisco. Greg Papa, voice of the 49ers, was talking about what he had seen and what he has learned through OTAs. And he said something very interesting. And the 49ers obviously have done a lot of work at corner. Not a lot of big money spent, not a lot of super high draft picks. Second rounder, which is the highest DB the 49ers have drafted in this regime. So I guess that's a lot spent that they brought in a couple of veterans in Rock Ya-Sin, Isaac Yiadom, and then drafting Renardo Green in the second round at corner. Clearly, cornerback was something that was a priority for the 49ers this offseason. And they hit it multiple times. Greg Papa was talking about Isaac Yiadom like he was the dude out there at OTAs. And it wasn't even like a question for Papa. He said, Isaac Yiadom's the guy on the outside. And so when it'll be Diamondo Lenore who starts on the outside, and then it'll be Diamondo and Lenore who moves inside, plays nickel, Croc, and Yiadom is the guy who's going to be coming in and playing outside. That is your 3 corner. Your nickel set is Demo outside in with the veteran Yiadom, who looked like the dude, was locking guys up at OTAs. He's the number 3 on the outside. And he spoke about it like it's a done deal, Croc. What do you think about that? And remember our guy, Ross Jackson, because Yiadom recently, most recently, by the way, a lot of people say his name very different. And some people got honest and say, you got to, like certain letters are silent because it's Yiadom. It's not Yiadom. It's not Yiadom. It's Yiadom, maybe? I'm going to call him Yiadom. Yiadom is what I'm going to call him right there. And if you know in the chat, let us know how to properly pronounce his name. But according to Greg Papa, that's what it's going to look like for the 49ers. And that's how good Yiadom, the free agent that the 49ers brought in, looked. And, it probably wouldn't be shocking if a rookie's not earning big time reps in week 1 of an NFL season.
Let's start with Isaac. All right, Isaac Y. That's what we'll call him right now to stop me from butchering his name. I call him Yiadom, Isaac Yiadom. But Isaac, all right. What did Ross text us immediately? All right, this is 4 p.m. on a Friday, around the time that free agency kind of opened up. And Ross Jackson kind of runs Locked On Network, but he also covers the New Orleans Saints for them. Isaac Yiadom was a guy who was with the New Orleans Saints last season. So a lot of times when a player goes from one place to another, you hear some of the worst things, especially from like a fan base. But Ross had this to say about Isaac. He said, got a good one in Yiadom. Now, this is the guy, again, we didn't seek out this information. This is just Ross texting us randomly, right, in the group chat with Peacock and I. Got a good one with Yiadom. And as I remember watching his film when he was coming out of Boston College, watched a little bit of him when he was with Denver. Has he played well in New Orleans? And this is what Ross had to say. He has played very well. Forced the highest forced incompletion percentage in the NFL last year. 14 pass breakups. Gave up 3 touchdowns in a couple of rough games and 1 interception. But he played much better than those numbers. Super technically sound. He isn't gifted with a ton of athleticism and all that. So he relies a lot on technique and being in position. A lot of that is what I saw from Isaac Yiadom coming out of Boston College. I thought he was a very scheme versatile guy that played well in the quarter system, some of the off-coverage things they did in Boston College. And if you think about the 49ers and kind of what they've done, and we'll see if they continue to build on that. Some people think that drafting Green means that they'll go towards maybe playing more of man coverage. But Yiadom, a guy who can play off coverage, play press, feels very comfortable being off and working in quarters. And it sounds like he did a really good job of playing whatever he was asked to do in New Orleans. And it's coming here where now Greg Papa is telling you, done deal. That's your CB3. My issue with that, if you did your due diligence watching the film, and maybe the 49ers, when they signed Yiadom, was as high on Yiadom as Ross Jackson, right? And what they saw with him in New Orleans. When you draft the cornerback second round, I would assume that you're drafting a guy that you want to start. So what does this mean for either Green, your rookie, or Diamador Lenore? Or are you just saying you can never have too many coverage guys, which that is a saying in the NFL as well? Like, what do you think from a roster building? I don't think you could just throw guys and then, we're just going to throw a lot of guys out there, see what sticks on a team that's trying to win a championship. I would assume you're getting guys that you feel like can contribute in a big way, potentially. That's what you're hoping for when you draft guys. So are they drafting for the future, or are they drafting because, hey, we want this guy to come in and play right now? And if so, what is that cornerback room going to potentially look like? It sounds like Greg Papa thinks Yiadom and maybe Diamador Lenore plays in the inside.
A lot there. I want to talk about the future in a little bit. I want to talk about the right now and who Isaac Yiadom is first. And with Renardo Green, it's just, look, the 49ers drafted a bunch of guys who are going to be, they're pretty old prospects, have played a lot of football, look pretty ready to play, 24-year-old rookies. You would think they are drafting that way because they like that these guys can play early. But I think you have to be realistic with rookies. I think Ricky Pearsall, if everybody's healthy and everyone's signed and nobody's holding out, I think he's going to be at most wide receiver 4 to start. I think we should probably be realistic about Renardo Green. He's going to start out inside, and if the 49ers think they have a better veteran option for a year, he's not going to be the guy who's the first man up off the bench at any of those spots, especially nickel corner, which is a very hard position to play in the NFL, even though it's not the highest, the highest prioritized position in the NFL. That's where a lot of offensive coordinators are attacking defenses. So it's pretty important to be really good there. And if 49ers went veteran for a year, then that would make some sense. And Isaac Yiadom's on a 1-year contract, just like Rock Ya-Sin is. And 1 year, $1.9 million. It's not very, like, for how good he is, that's not a lot of money either, Croc. Like, you don't sign a guy for 1 year, 1.9 mil and say, whoop, we're done there. He's a stud starter. He's obviously going to start, right? That's not the type of money that a starting cornerback makes in the NFL. But he's also a veteran player. 4.52 40-yard dash at the combine. In what year was that? I was 19. 2018 was the draft that Isaac Yiadom came out. Same draft as Fred Warner came out.
Same draft as Dante Pettis.
Dante Pettis draft in that same round, second rounder.
I feel like he went third.
day two. I think he was a day two guy. It's not on this combine list. I'm looking at what round he was drafted in. 2018 class though. 4.52 40-yard dash. 6'1", little hair under 6'1", 190 pounds. So solid size, solid speed, but not spectacularly big, not spectacularly fast.
Third round pick, by the way.
A third round pick. Okay. But you know
late third.
You got the Kyle Shanahan 3-cone, 6'8" 3-cone, 34.5-inch vertical. So, some quicks, solid athleticism, nothing that really blows you away. Competitive player. Really similar profile to Renardo Green. Right, Croc? Like pretty close. And you read the scouting report, and I think it's very similar. Renardo Green ran just a hair faster, 4.52 versus 4.49, and Yiedom's just a hair taller, like an inch taller, maybe. Actually,
I think my push or my issue with it is, I think, and this is water on the bridge. Can't change anything about the draft, but it almost felt like there were guys at certain spots that they could draft that would come in and play if that was something that you were trying to do, right? Like if you wanted a nickel or a safety or even an outside guy, like with your first pick, if you felt like Ricky Pearsall, he's kind of coming in as a fourth best receiver, and maybe at this time they didn't know what they were going to do with Debo and Ayuk, and there were the trade talks as well, so maybe that pick was a little bit more insurance, but could you have drafted Kool-Aid McKinstry? Like, could you have drafted Cooper DeJean and felt more confident that, like, okay, this guy is a day one starter, as opposed to drafting Green, where some people felt like it was like really around early or too early, right? Like not even the Pearsall pick where that's like, okay, maybe he's 15 slots a little early. Green, for a lot of people, felt around or too early. And you had the opportunity to maybe draft a guy that would play higher. So just, how do you feel about the way they attacked the cornerback position? Because even with the Green pick, for me, it felt like they were just kind of adding another guy to the room, as opposed to adding the guy to the room, or like the potential guy, like the guy that when I was with the New York Jets, I've told the stories about Darren Waller, t-shirts and shorts, which maybe we can't even take a whole lot of the Isaac Yiadom thing, with what he's doing. But I remember Darren Waller making a lot of plays, but the Jets drafted 9th overall D Milliner. So once D was healthy and he signed on the dotted lines, like, well, it doesn't matter. D Milliner is your starting corner. 49ers clearly are not taking that approach. So it just has always felt like when they drafted Green, it was more of, we're gonna throw as many guys at this position and see who is the guy that ends up taking control of it, as opposed to throwing a guy at the position that they think is the guy.
I have thoughts on this, and we'll get to those next. You said Darren Waller?
Excuse me, Darren Walls. Sorry.
Darren Walls. Okay, I was going to say, I didn't remember Darren Waller being with the Jets.
Walls. Sorry, guys. Darren Walls out of Notre Dame. Shout out to Darren Walls. Came from the Atlanta Falcons the year before.
Politics plays a role, but I have some thoughts on this and the 49ers draft and where these guys fit in and how soon they fit into big roles for the 49ers, especially with those first 3-round picks. And we'll get to that and some really interesting stats on Kyle Shanahan's offense as well next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is sponsored by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and a whole lot more. You don't want to bet on the NBA or the NHL? It's okay. Major League Baseball every day, all summer long. And of course, you can still bet on NFL football, including your San Francisco 49ers as well. The betting favorite to win the next Super Bowl are the San Francisco 49ers. 60-1 odds for Offensive Rookie of the Year for Ricky Pearsall. One injury is probably about all it would take. And then this aggressively intermediate offense we're going to talk about in a bit might fit him really well. Again, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count, or NFL or Major League Baseball, whatever it is you want to bet on. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If the plan is that Ricky Pearsall's the fourth receiver and maybe starts to get more reps in year 2. And Renardo Green is kind of, behind a lot of guys on the depth chart and might start getting some reps in year 2. And if Dominick Puni is going to be behind Spencer Burford and Feliciano and Aaron Banks and might start getting more reps in year 2, then I do start to have a question, Croc, on why are you drafting these really ready to play guys, 24-year, like we talked about the PFF 25 under 25 list, right? Last week. The 49ers won't have a second year player in, like, none of those top 3 picks will be under 25 next year. Right. So even if you thought like one of those draft picks the 49ers made in the first 3 rounds is like awesome breakout player as a rookie, year 2, they would be too old to be eligible for the 25 under 25 list, where you have guys like Penei Sewell, who's already on his second contract. And you have Amon-Ra St. Brown already has his second contract, and a number of those types of players. So, and again, like, age is only important if they become good. Right. But I thought post-draft, our thoughts, and I think we're guilty of this, and I think the fan base at large is even more guilty than we are, because I think we're pretty realistic about how things are going to go for rookies and draft picks. But man, you're drafting a second-round corner. He's an outside corner. It's like, man, that's kind of the spot. Come in, play, compete there. If you're not playing early, then okay, well, what are we doing? Why are you? And maybe it's not a reach. Maybe he should have been a first round guy, right? But if you're not earning a lot of reps as a rookie, then it's hard to argue that he has all this, extra value, and you saw him right and everyone else was wrong that had him a round or 2 later or whatever it was. And with Ricky Pearsall, it's the same. It's like, he should be so good if you're drafting this guy in the first round that you can't help but give him targets. Like, you have to target him because he is so good and needs to be a part of your offense. And Dominick Puni should be pushing somebody for a starting role. And so, because they traded up for him in the 3rd round. And I don't dislike any of the players the 49ers drafted, but they drafted some pretty finished products. And if they're still not able to push for big roles early and beat out a guy who's on a 1-year, $1.9 million deal as a rookie, then I start to have questions about the strategy of it and the team building of it. And I think it's a great point brought up by you, Croc, was like, okay, you're trying to find someone who's going to play early. Well, go get someone who's going to play early then. And if you're drafting guys who are older prospects that are ready to play and they're still not ready to play and can't beat out other guys that are, veteran free agents that are signing on short-term deals that are essentially mercenaries at this point, and you can't beat them out, then I would start to have a little bit of a question of the draft strategy of the 49ers in that case. And the draft is never about a guy's rookie season, but when you look at it through the lens of who the guys the 49ers drafted early and what their strengths are, their strengths weren't necessarily this big upside. Their strengths were, these guys have playable skills now. And if they're not going to play now, then I think I do start to have a little bit of questions about that team building strategy.
I think the 49ers have a terrific roster, and you have, with Brock Purdy, the way he's playing, and all these. I mean, we could just go on a roll with just listing standout players on both sides of the ball where it could cover up if a rookie doesn't come in and play well or never plays well. I mean, we saw that with Trey Lance, right? Like, you spent 3 years worth of first round picks on a guy who did not play for you, played 4 games. That was it. And even then, you've been to 3 straight NFC championship games and a Super Bowl. So clearly the 49ers are a team that's built for, if the rookie doesn't come in and play right away, they still can have a certain level of success. But just, that's not your thoughts going into the draft. Your thoughts going into the draft is that I'm drafting guys that can play. A few of these guys can play early. This guy will have this kind of impact. You talked about even, like, let's say mid-round picks, and you mentioned a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown. We mentioned him a little bit earlier. Well, St. Brown was a 4th-round pick who came in, and when you talk about beating guys out, he had 119 targets his rookie year. Now, I don't know what their situation was, were they behind all the time or whatever, but as a rookie, 4th round pick. He was a guy that came in and got 119 targets and has only gotten more since then. 146 targets year 2. 49ers receivers don't get that many targets. 164 targets last year and 119 receptions to go with that. So you're seeing, hey, this is a guy that was a 4th round pick because he wasn't very big and then he didn't test amazing. But okay, we still see him as a guy that can come in and potentially play. And that's exactly what he did. Do we see that with the guys that the 49ers have potentially drafted? And what is their role going to be on a team where you'd assume the role is to contribute to this team getting over the hump and winning a Super Bowl, as opposed to just running it back with the same exact roster? So maybe it is going to be a guy that like Isaac Yiadom, who helps put your team over the hump, and Lenore can stay in the slot and you still got Travis Ward. And then maybe next year, a guy like, Green steps in and Puni steps in and Pearsall has a bigger, I was going to use a word that was very questionable, but has more on his plate, in the sense of responsibility for the 49ers. And then from that standpoint, it all makes sense. But it's just a little interesting when it felt like there were guys that you could have drafted. Maybe they didn't fit the scheme, so you didn't draft a guy in that range. But I felt like there was, when you kind of see it in hindsight, and if Yiadom plays as well as Greg Papa thinks he's going to, it just starts to look a little interesting. But the team is so good, I'm not sure it even matters.
It is fascinating, though, when you look up and down the 49ers roster. There's some obvious players that are, they traded for Trent Williams, and he's the best tackle in the league, and he was still the best tackle in the league after they traded for him. But their plan when they drafted players was, they didn't plan that Hufanga was going to be an All-Pro. They didn't plan that George Kittle was going to end up being the best tight end in the NFL. They didn't plan that that Elijah Mitchell was going to be better than Trey Sermon. They didn't plan that Jordan Mason was going to be better than Ty Davis Price, right? And so there's a lot of things that go unplanned throughout this. And it's one of the things that we kind of forget, and we look at things in order. And just because a guy we think is better, the 49ers didn't draft him, doesn't mean the guy that they drafted later or the guy they drafted instead that was graded out as a later pick isn't better. But it also doesn't mean that the 49ers got it right either. And the guy that they drafted where they did is going to be better than the guys who went after them as well.
Because if they knew that, they would draft him earlier.
Right, exactly. So the draft is nobody knows anything about the draft. We think we know, and we don't know, and neither does the team. And so we're gonna have to find out. But if the strategy is to draft older prospects that are more ready to play, but they still don't play, then just the overall idea of that sentence, that idea, I do have a little bit of a problem with, just because of how things went in the draft. And they're like, oh, we don't like. And look, Kingsley Suamataia is one of the guys. It's one of the ones I'm going to bring up because I would have not traded back, like personally, on record before, while it was happening live and after. Like, this isn't a hindsight thing. Suamataia could have been a high upside starting NFL offensive tackle. Will he ever become that? Maybe not. Is he at his ceiling as a player? No. But dude is a redshirt sophomore. He was 20 years old when he was playing, right? You think he's going to be a better prospect in 3 years if he was graduating then and in the draft, when he would be the age of the guys the 49ers were drafting in the first 3 rounds? So there is going to always be some projection in the draft. And that's fine if a guy's not ready to play, if his upside is, oh man, he's going to be awesome later. But if a guy's already bumping his head on the ceiling and he's still not ready to play as a 24-year-old rookie, then I start to wonder, okay, well, when's he going to make good on that pick you selected him with?
So Suamataia, did he go to Kansas City?
KC. Yep. Kansas
City. So Kansas City with their first pick. Okay, because we're talking about draft plans and we're just trying to figure out, hey, we don't know everything, but what are the 49ers doing? Right? What are their thoughts with the way that they're doing things, and how are guys going to contribute? With the first pick, the Kansas City Chiefs selected, the kid out of Fresno,
Xavier Worthy. Yeah,
Xavier Worthy from Texas. Yeah. It is very clear why they drafted him when they drafted him and what his role with this team will be, or what, at least, I don't want to say what it will be, what they want it to be.
Right.
Like, it's very clear. They're thinking, hey, we need a speedster come in here, help open things up. Rashee Rice, he's in a lot of trouble, but he wasn't, whatever. Just their thoughts, right? Like just the goal, what they were trying to do. All right, we got Rashee Rice. We now we got a guy, Xavier Worthy. He can take the top off defense. We still got Travis Kelce. Okay, second round, we come in. Hey, let's trade up. We got a 49er spot. Let's get Sua Matia. Let's really work towards, getting this offensive line right. He's going to come in. Our goal is for him to play right now, right? Like, it's very clear what their goal is. And you and I are just trying to figure out with the 49ers, what's your goal to get your team better this year? Because the moves that we just talked about with Kansas City, team just coming off of another Super Bowl win back to back, they are making these moves to get better. They feel Xavier Worthy makes them better this year. Sua Matia makes them better this year. And both those guys make them not only better this year, but in the future as well, because those are younger prospects as opposed to what the 49ers did. So just interesting. And maybe there's just, it's one of those, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And the 49ers have been really good skinning the cat the way that they've done it. But are we going to continue to be having these conversations moving forward?
It's not right or wrong. It's what's the plan. And so plan a little cloudy right now for the 49ers with these older prospects that seem ready to play if they still don't play early in their careers. And next, I want to talk about Kyle Shanahan's offense and probably one of the big reasons why Ricky Pearsall is a fantastic fit for Kyle Shanahan in the 49ers and Brock Purdy is quarterback. Next. This episode of Locked On 49ers is sponsored by Gametime. Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even easier and faster than ever before, and it was always easy and fast with Gametime. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes all the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute sports, concerts, comedy, theater seats near you. Flash deals, you save even more. Exclusive in-app deals on select seats, and zone deals save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats. And my favorite part is the all-in pricing, right? You toggle this feature on, and you see the total up front. No surprise fees at checkout, which is my least favorite parts of buying tickets for any concert or sporting event or comedy show I go to. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Croc. Let's take some of the guesswork out and look at some of some nuggets I've seen in the last week or so talking about Kyle Shanahan and his offense that I wanted to bring up on today's show, just to show the level of, I don't know if genius is the right word, but Kyle Shanahan's a great offensive coordinator. Even if you don't like him as a head coach, it's hard to deny he does certain things very well. And I always called Kyle Shanahan's offense aggressively intermediate. And here's a stat that shows that more than any other. So this is from Carter Dominick on Twitter. Middle of the field attempts by quarterbacks, according to Pro Football Focus charting last season. So this is PFF charting. Here's the percentage of throws each NFL quarterback attempted within 10 to 19 yards. So that intermediate part of the field, right? We're not talking about checkdowns here. We're talking 10 yards to 19 yards down the field and in the middle portion of the field. And if you've watched Kyle Shanahan, you watch the 49ers, you know the 49ers live in that area of the field, especially some big time third down throws that Kyle Shanahan asks his quarterbacks to throw. Brock Purdy, not number one though, Croc. Number one, Tua Tagovailoa. 18% of his pass attempts come in that area of the field. Number two, CJ Stroud as a rookie, 15.63% of his attempts in that area of the field. Number three, Brock Purdy, just a hair less than CJ Stroud, 15.09%. And then a big gap after Brock Purdy. The next closest is 12.73%. So the only three quarterbacks that are attempting throws in that area of the field, the aggressively intermediate area of the field, Tua, CJ Stroud, Brock Purdy, what do they have in common? Shanahan, tree, One is Kyle Shanahan's quarterback. The other two are the most recent offensive coordinators for Kyle Shanahan. The most recent hires off of Kyle Shanahan. One offensive coordinator in Bobby Slowick is CJ Stroud's offensive coordinator in Houston, and then obviously Tua's head coach now, who was the offensive coordinator under Kyle Shanahan and Mike McDaniels there. So I think that's pretty telling. And you go down the list a little bit more. You got Jared Goff, which is a former Shanahan quarterback. Then you have, you have Jared Goff, and you have Kirk Cousins, a former Kyle Shanahan quarterback, and then you have Matthew Stafford, McVay, obviously, so Shanahan tree. So, middle of the field, I just thought it was such a telling statistic there.
Now, I think what's more telling is talk about the bottom guys, and then I think that'll help us spin it back and maybe prop up some of these guys that are on the higher end.
Very interesting. The very last quarterback who qualified for this, 35 on the list of those middle of the field throws, Josh Dobbs, a competitor to be the backup quarterback for the 49ers this year, only 3.84% of his throws. But of the big names at the bottom of the list, Russell Wilson, he's obviously, had trouble throwing over the middle of the field in his career. He's a get out of the pocket, beautiful deep ball thrower. Geno Smith, Trevor Lawrence, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields. Those are some of the guys that have the lowest. We're talking around 5% of their throws over the middle of the field.
Now, obviously, a lot of this has to do with scheme, but I think there's also another element to this. Like some of the guys that you just mentioned, it feels like they don't see the game as well as the guys that we see higher on this list, right? Like guys that truly understand how to get the ball out of their hands, play with timing, rhythm, right? They're on time, they're accurate, and they're very confident with what they're seeing from the defense, whether it's pre-snap or post-snap movement, and still being able to throw that ball in there. And clearly their coaches, the way they're calling plays, are very confident that those guys can execute at that level. And you mentioned some of the younger guys, some of the guys at the bottom. How much movement had there been with those guys, right? How much movement has there been with Russell Wilson? You went from Seattle, started getting a little weird. You got traded to Denver. Now you're in Pittsburgh. Justin Fields has been rocky, super rocky with the Chicago Bears, and then you get traded to Pittsburgh Steelers. You mentioned Geno Smith. He had been a journeyman quarterback up until the last few years with Seattle, but for the most of his career, journeyman guy finding his footing. Dobbs got traded like 4 times last year. Like all the quarterbacks that you mentioned that are at the bottom are guys that it feels like are struggling to kind of find their footing, at least at this point in whatever their careers are, as opposed to the other guys you mentioned who have had a lot of either early success or consistent success at the NFL level. So it really speaks volumes to just being able to do that. And obviously I know the thing that a lot of us want to see, the ball is downfield, outside the numbers, those things, but being able to have the confidence to throw over the middle, I think it speaks volumes to how those quarterbacks are really seeing the field consistently for their coordinators.
Yeah, and scheme is obviously the biggest part of that, and it's why those quarterbacks are, higher efficiency guys, and you're looking for a certain ability to be able to make those throws. And Trey Lance didn't prove early in his career that he was able to make those throws, and that's why he's gone. A couple of the names of guys who haven't bounced around, Croc, Trevor Lawrence and Kyler Murray, and I find it fascinating that Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson are 2 of the 3 starting NFL quarterbacks that are like 5'10" or shorter that are on this list, and they're both at the bottom of the list. Short guys have more trouble seeing the ball over the middle of the field, seeing through the trees and seeing through the linemen. But Bryce Young's actually pretty high on the list. I think he's top 10, which was a little bit surprising from rookie Bryce Young last year. And again, part of it is scheme, but maybe, and he didn't perform well, so maybe he needs to get out of the pocket more and not be forced to throw the ball over the middle of the field. So maybe it's not good that he's attempting those passes over the middle of the field.
Trevor Lawrence, like I said, not a journeyman quarterback, but his saving grace right now is that his scenario in Jacksonville hasn't been great, albeit the last 2 years he has had Doug Peterson. You'd assume that things will continue to get better. You'd assume that. And it sounds like they're potentially trying to work on locking him up to a long-term contract. But right now, if you were just to say, has he played better than Brock Purdy? The answer is no, right? So how well is he seeing the field? Now, we know he could do special things. He could make special throws, and he clearly isn't a guy that has trouble seeing over the offensive line, with him being 6'6". But there's been something there that has added to just some inconsistent play. And it could be, hey, man, I don't get to play with some of the weapons that these other guys have. But I think a lot of it just is maybe not consistently seeing the field quite as well as the Brock Purdy's, the Kirk Cousins, the Matthew Staffords, even the CJ,
CJ Stroud?
Yeah, CJ Stroud of the world.
The question here, going back to our earlier topic about the cornerback situation, King Theo wants to know, any estimates on costs of extending Ward and Lenore? I think that's part of the 49ers. And look, the 49ers do this early in drafts as they kind of force need a little bit and draft for need, and need might not be year one, it might be year two. And we saw a second round pick a few years ago in Aaron Banks, who didn't play at all. It was like, oh, is this guy a bust? What's going on? He's not playing at all. Croc, you and I didn't love his tape and love the fit. And then all of a sudden, year two, he jumps in as a starter. So maybe that's the Renardo Green pick, because Charvarius Ward is going into the last year of his 3-year contract he signed with the 49ers. And then you got to re-up Dominick Lenore most likely in the next offseason or so. And so that's probably the trade-off there, is you lose Ward, Demo starts to get paid, and you need someone to jump in there. And at that point, you would think Renardo Green should be ready in year two to jump into that role. So if you're looking at what the plan might be, maybe that is the plan for Renardo Green, year two to step in for a jettisoned Charvarius Ward who leaves via free agency for the 49ers.
I can say that, and it's always felt like Charvarius Ward, I guess after the first year, and he's played well. He was an all-pro guy last year. Felt like made a lot of plays, big interceptions, big moments. Really just a big, compliment to how really both cornerbacks, Ward and Lenore. I think the 49er fan base, for a position that has really been kind of up in the air, kind of over the last few years, like, man, what exactly are they doing here? Are they going to, draft cornerback high? They've elected to not do that, but they've gotten terrific play out of Ward and Lenore. And every time I go into a game, I never feel like those guys are going to be the issue.
By the way, Lenore, for some reason, I was a year behind on Lenore. So Lenore is going into the final year of his contract, and then he'll be an unrestricted free agent next offseason. So maybe a Lenore deal is a sneaky deal that could be done as helmet to helmet in the chat here says, done this offseason, potentially before he reaches free agency. So Lenore and Charvarius Ward, both unrestricted free agents next offseason. So that is a hole the 49ers have to fill, and maybe speaks to why the 49ers were willing to go a little bit higher than consensus on a cornerback in the late second round, because they knew they needed someone who could start by year two. Thanks, everybody, for making Locked On 49ers your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We appreciate you. We love you. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, hit the notification, the thumbs up, and all of that. And, of course, you can subscribe everywhere you are listening to this podcast. Croc and I back tomorrow right here, Locked On 49ers.